What you need to know about the rookies for the Dynasty Rookie Drafts and how we are attacking them in Dynasty, which will then obviously turn into our season-long approach, which players we like the most from this current crop and will be targeting throughout the offseason in our redraft and best ball leagues. That is what we're talking about today on RotoViz Overtime. My name is Colm Kelly. I'm joined as always by Shawn Siegele. Shawn and myself are going to talk through a pick as we are on the clock in a $250 FFPC RotoViz Triflex League. We're going to make that decision while we are on today's show. And we're also going to talk through a big trade that we made in one of our other $250 tiered teams, Shawn, where we traded up to get the 107 to make a selection. We'll let you know who that was. And in this other league, Shawn, that we're on the clock, we also had the 101. So we will reveal that. Shawn, we're teasing everything today. We have lots of stuff. As you can tell, I'm a bit giddy with the rookie season here with the drafts going on. So we have lots to talk about. Shawn, how are you feeling here as we work our way through a couple of days into the draft, I guess, season, but not necessarily. There's some pre-draft stuff. There's some stuff that kicked off for me the day after the NFL draft, and now this is kind of really in the heart of it. How are you feeling? Are you enjoying it as much as I am?
Yes. Rookie draft weekend is maybe the best weekend of the year. The best weekend of the fantasy football season. Colm.
Trademark, hashtag, copyright. Best time of the year is every time of the year on RotoViz OT.
But Colm, this time is pretty special, right? I've got 9 FFPC Dynasty teams. I know lots of folks have 1 or 2, and those are super fun to follow. I know there are folks out there with 50 or 60. That I think probably gets hectic, but you can certainly take a very dominant portfolio approach to those teams. Colm, I basically have just spent the last 48 hours in front of the computer making picks, trying to make trades, getting in and getting out, because executing the rookie draft really is worth, tens of thousands of dollars in that everything we talk about in terms of the permanent championship window, perpetual reloading. So much of that is predicated on having a strong rookie draft approach, both from the perspective of navigating the tiers and moving some value into the future, or as you and I did in the league that we do with the listeners. And the listener league has been absolutely fantastic. We made a trade to actually move
We moved that future value into the present.
We did. So, Colm, let's start off. We had the 101 in our one team that didn't make the playoffs last year and won the back draw. So that's how you get the 101 in the FFPC leagues. We hadn't really talked about it. Obviously, we've done a lot of shows and chats together over the last month. We were obviously going to take Ashton, Jeanty. But then Saturday morning starts, and I'm sending a flurry of messages to Colm. And I'm like, oh, he's not there. He's not there. Colm, what was the scoop? We did finally get it all together.
Yeah, the decision, I think, was basically you get Jeanty at the 101 or you get a package to move down. My father-in-law's 60th birthday was over the weekend, so we had some festivities, and took me out of the loop a little bit from my communication over that time. And I trusted Shawn. I knew we had the 101 locked down unless a deal came in. So there wasn't anything forthcoming. So I think it was pretty cut and dry, clear 101. You make the selection there. So that one was pretty straightforward. You mentioned we didn't talk about him a lot on the show, I think, because when we had on guests or when we talked through the draft itself, through the rookie guide, it was a case that it was like, this guy is at the top of the class, and then it's options below that. So the 101, that was a clear pick. Pretty excited that was the only 101 I had. We'll talk about a 102 that I traded away earlier today, later in the show to finish things up. But that was the only 102. I had the 101 here, and nice to get a share, because consensus 101, you're not really going to get them at any other point. So Shawn, that brings us, I think we'll keep to that league and we'll go with the 201 as we're on the clock. No offers really forthcoming here, but there is some interesting players that are available for selection in this one. Most of the main guys that you would expect through the 110 have gone off the board. The last 2 picks have been Caleb Johnson and Emeka Egbuka. Luther Burden's available. Matthew Golden's available. Jaden Higgins available. When you look here, and you have an article up on rotoviz.com looking at, making the picks and how to beat the tier breaks in Dynasty, and you're viewing here at this point, are we at a tier break? Are we just potentially in front of a tier break?
One of the things that the rookie drafts really do is they help crystallize what you believe deep down about the players and how you want to play it yourself, which then if you're an analyst, you should probably reflect back in how you're putting the content together. I feel really good about the volume 3 of the rookie guide, which we put out very quickly after the draft without getting necessarily a sense of where the community was going to go on things. Having seen where the community is going, I feel even better about the rookie guide because I think it will help you exploit what's actually happening. And sometimes, you put things out and then you have more time to think through it. And you're like, well, I probably got that wrong. I can see why the wisdom of crowds. And again, sometimes there's a wisdom of crowds element. Sometimes there is not exactly, or there are big flaws in it in the way that fantasy currently works. Sometimes you look at it and you say, no, I really think that we're probably right on this. As we move through the last 48 hours, and I think back to the rankings that I put out last week as well, which are slightly different, but very similar to the rookie guide rankings, or my rankings specifically, as opposed to the rankings with Kevin and Blair also working through that project with me. I think I would now subtly change the tiers in that I do think that you have Jeanty at the top. And then I think you have a 4-player group that is Hampton, McMillan, Hunter, and Henderson in whichever order you prefer them. And we'll go into that a little bit more in a moment. Then I think there's a 2-player group of RJ Harvey and Cam Ward. And Harvey being there obviously is a little bit different than where ADP is, not necessarily dramatically. And then I think it's not really the 108 because again, Harvey is not necessarily going that early, but from that point until the 207, you have a tier that is just one big tier. And so you're getting essentially the same value from the 205, the 206 that you're getting at the 110. That I think is a little bit unusual. And certainly it factors back into this pick that we're making here where, the person that I have the highest rated is actually Jaden Higgins. He's someone who generally is going in that 204, 205-ish range. Monty and I were actually lamenting a little bit a trade that we didn't make when he had fallen. By picks, it was actually not a good trade. But one of the things that I do try and emphasize to people is that making trades during the rookie drafts is a lot less about value than it is about positioning. And now, you're not going to lose track of value completely. Obviously, the idea of positioning is embedded within this idea of value, but you don't want to look at something and be like, oh, well, I moved down 4 picks, but I only moved up 3 picks. It's like if you stayed in the same tier and then from your picks that moved up, you jumped a tier, then you've won, right? Or you've accomplished your objectives. And so I think that part of it is interesting. Colm, I was mentioning to you before we started that in the last 24 hours, I've picked Scatterboo at 111 and I've picked him at 207. So again, that gives a little bit of a feel for, where you might occasionally make what is an ADP reach on Scatterboo, but also he could fall to you very, very deep in round 2, which that goes back to our philosophy of trying to accumulate as many future second round picks as possible. Now, some of these picks that are beyond that tier break have a lot less value because once you hit that tier break going from 207 to 208, it's a massive collapse in value. So, to the extent where I was trying to work on something yesterday without 111 and you're like, we'll give the 111 and the 208 for like the 204 and 206. And people are like, nope. Because they understand where the tier break is, right? And so that's kind of what we're dealing with here. It's probably also the reason we're not receiving any trade offers for this pick, and why if we make some trades to move down or make some offers to move down, we probably would get a number of declines. At the same time, it's perfectly reasonable to personally have a target that is much higher for you that you want to go get and to do that, right? I mean, one of the reasons that this group is so flat is there are a lot of interesting players, and certainly they're not all going to have the same outcomes.
Yeah.
And so if you have correctly picked the right guy, then that will go a long way. So I don't think trading up is necessarily a huge problem either. Getting your guy is never a mistake. Now, in retrospect, you can have picked the wrong person, but you want to play this game to get your guy. Colin, who's your guy here?
Well, you kind of hinted at your range of outcomes for drafting Scadaboo. I have felt like throughout the course of this draft experience over the last like week and a half that it feels like, you know, if I'm on the clock at the 110 or if I'm on the clock at the 205, like it's Jaden Higgins seems to be there in all the drafts. And then I'm like, am I the only person that wants to draft Jaden Higgins? But, you know, that is the way that I've been playing it. I feel like this particular pick at the 201, you are between Higgins, Golden, and Burden. And then, you know, we were talking about our deal that we'll talk about in a minute. We were offered the 108 from the drafter who had the 108 and the 107. We looked for the 107 because there was one player specifically that we wanted to trade up and get with the pick. But in this one here, it's like a case of there is those multiple choices and there is kind of a tier for me. I would have Higgins at the front of that tier. By ADP, generally it's Golden that's at the front, and usually Higgins and Bird are going pretty much back to back. And I think it's a case that just it's the personal preference of which player that you want to play it through. I'm at that point now, you know, when you get to draft season, Shawn, and it's like the first draft, you're like, yes, I got Jaden Higgins. The second draft, you're like, yes, I got Jaden Higgins. And then you're like 4 drafts in, 5 drafts in, you're like, if I'm not right about Jaden Higgins, this is this is a lot of Jaden Higgins. So how is your exposure to Jaden Higgins? Is that where you are willing to dip in here? Have you another player that I haven't mentioned that you would be putting into the conversation here? But they would be kind of the 3 names I'd be looking at here at the 201.
Yeah, I think that Scadaboo is also in play. I do think that for me, it's Higgins. And I don't have a lot of Higgins, somewhat weirdly, and this is kind of, you know, both the gift and the curse of drafting with a lot of co-managers. But Colm, I have a lot of Luther Burden, and I can certainly see the potential there with getting a guy who, you know, a month ago, maybe 106, 107, and now he's consistently in that, you know, 202 to 205, 206 range. At the same time, I was maybe a tiny bit skeptical before, you know, this flurry of sort of post-draft reports that one of the reasons he fell was that in addition to having a terrible final season, people are questioning his practice habits. Missouri is trying to, you know, bandage their own reputation for both being able to run offense and run practice, and saying, no, that's not the case. But Burden is the player that I have a ton of exposure to and probably don't need any more. When you look at our roster in this league, I think we have the ability to go a lot of different places, but it probably is one where a wide receiver would be more appropriate. We currently have DeAndre Swift and Jordan Mason on the bench with 3 running backs already in the lineup, 4 wide receivers in the lineup, but our bench wide receivers, which again, you can just move one of those running backs into the second flex spot and the bench looks a little bit different. But Quentin Johnston, basically 0 value at this point after their picks, and Marvin Mims, someone else who probably loses a decent amount of value with that Pat Bryant selection. Wide receiver,
and
probably
the other player who we'll talk about in a moment that we traded up for, who we're trying to maintain a low profile about. We've got comments, Shawn, through YouTube. Stop hyping that guy up, but we will talk about him later. We'll get people to stay to the end of the show. But I do think on this roster, you don't want to get into a situation where you're drafting for need. It's not necessarily need, but we have Jeanty now on this roster, Chase Brown and Kenneth Walker. And I think also when you're factoring in the rest of the draft, in this particular draft, we won't be picking to the 302. We have a 1 pick swap there where we are 13 picks away after this particular one, but then we'll be picking at the 401, 501, 601. We have quite a few picks, Shawn, throughout the course: 2 4th rounds, 3 6th rounds, 2 7th rounds. Veterans will be sprinkled into the draft, but there's also going to be some potential to get some of the later rookie running backs, or maybe even package together some things to move up if any of the players that we like would happen to slide down through the draft. So I do think that the wide receiver makes sense. I am going to throw this out there. I did mention the 3 that would be in the tier. Looking at your rankings, I was interested, or your article, I was interested to see, and you said about updating the tiers, and it's been a longer tier now. But Matthew Golden did slide into the tier 3 originally. That will be filtered probably to a tier 4 at this particular point. He's in with those guys that we mentioned. Are you able to make a pitch to try and get me to draft a Packer?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
I don't think so.
Higgins is the pick. Then I've been taking Higgins over both of those guys in drafts. I have picked up some burden along the way as well. No Golden as of yet, but let's go and make Higgins that selection. We will move into, and we've done a lot of teasing. We'll move into the pick. We didn't actually have a first round pick, and it's interesting in the rookie draft, or the startup draft last year, we traded away our 2025 first round pick in that startup, which we talked about at the time. Not something that we envisioned going in, but it worked out for the case of the draft. We were lucky enough that we then won that league, which meant that the pick had substantially less value, obviously, which isn't always the case. You have that vision, we trade the pick, we win the league. Aren't we so great? But that isn't the way it always plays out. But then, Shawn, we get an offer for the 108. The manager messaged that they had sent out offers to everyone in the league. So I'm frantically messaging Shawn because I know it's early morning over there when he's getting, I'm like, hopefully this doesn't go through. But we sent a counter offer for 1 pick earlier, which is the 107. They had both picks. We traded up, Shawn. We had 1 player we wanted, and we got that player, and we selected that player. We can't continue from this point forward in the show to say that we are going to keep expectations and people's excitement for this player down. But who, Shawn, was the player at the 107 that we traded our 2026 first round pick for, along with a 3rd round pick, which I thought was, again, showing people, if they are interested in the rookie drafts, trading up is something that's possible because of the wide tier. People are kind of like, I got to take what I can get as well, if they do want to move out. Who was that player, Shawn?
Colm, you got to grab the next Alvin Kamara, the next Jamal Charles. You got to get RJ Harvey on your roster there. I tried to be a little bit conservative in my projection of where he would go. And it was funny because I was mentioning to you, I wrote an article about the tiers. I wrote an article about my projections for the FFPC rookie drafts. And the area that I was most wrong in was not actually deep in round 2, deep in round 3. I mean, almost through 4.5 rounds as we're getting back the ADP now. It looks very, very accurate. But this area from 107 to the 201 did surprise me. Tyler Warren going ahead of Colston Loveland. I thought that we would get a real separation there with Loveland at the top of the tier around 107 and Warren at the bottom around 201. I thought that Judkins being in a bad offense and having Dylan Sampson drafted on top of him, especially with, and these weren't concerns we completely shared, but Scott Barrett had some, I think, important notes about his profile when we had him on OT. I thought that he would fall not to the bottom of this group, but a little bit more. And I thought that these first round wide receivers, even though everyone more or less agrees they shouldn't have gone in the first round, they did, right? And when you look at the warts on some of the other players, I mean, I guess the tight ends who are going in round 3 are so exciting that Warren and Loveland, with the problems that they have, they don't appeal to me. And I don't think they're going to be able to do what we've gotten from Laporta and Bowers, which isn't even, coming out and making that strong of a statement, because we sort of know that what Laporta and Bowers did is very unusual. But if you don't have those guys, then you're definitely trying to chase that production. Colm, I guess I'm surprised that RJ Harvey is going on average at the 110. In one of my drafts, he fell to the 112. Obviously, if you have an average around 110, you're sometimes going there because people like us are drafting him at the 107. This is the player you've got to try and get in the first round, because it's much more difficult, obviously, to get into that top 5. You're going to pay a really heavy price. Harvey is the type of prospect who could outscore those guys, and you can actually afford to go get him. That lessens your risk to an extent, although obviously he does bust. We're going to be heartbroken.
Yes, it's obviously going to be disappointing. But again, the price that we had to give up wasn't egregious, because it was at that back part of the draft. And as I mentioned, people having their tiers in a certain way and being able to get it. So hopefully it won't lead to us, Shawn, having tiers in the future. And it will be tears of joy if we have any tiers.
Colm, what did we pay to get up and get it?
It was the the first round pick from 2025 and the 305 this year for the 107, which I thought was a fair price. Like, you're just basically moving your pick forward. You're missing out on that 305, which again, it will be interesting when we go to that point of the draft. Our draft hasn't moved forward to that stage yet, but to see what player is available there, and maybe you're like, oh, I would really like to have that player, and we can kind of compare and contrast. Obviously, it'll be 12 months before we know who that first round pick was. So fair price, and making always fun trying to make those particular deals.
Colm, there's certainly an issue here where people might say, if you guys are coming off of the victory and have a young team, then the pick that you traded for 2026 could be in a worse spot than the pick that you got. And so from that perspective, it's pretty favorable to you. I mean, hopefully that's the case, but you do want to be humble when you're making those moves, but also when you're getting the picks in the future, you want to not lock yourself into this idea that the team is definitively going to finish in the top couple. One of the things that we
if you miss the
playoff,
playoff, Shawn, you're like in the mix then for the 106 instantly. It's
and so our team that we just discussed, where we had the 101, we were coming off of a strong season where we've been in the playoffs. We just missed the playoffs by like a couple points. I mean, a couple points in the final week of the season. And if we make the playoffs, then we also had a good playoff run. We might have finished second or third. I don't know what the final scores were for the playoff teams. But because of this format, we won the backdraw. So if someone had traded for our pick, they would have traded for the 101. And that's similar to what would happen here. If we don't make the playoffs, we are going to make a push in the backdraw. You'd like your chances to win the backdraw. So it's possible that our opponents just traded for the 101 in that deal. The other thing is that I just mentioned the tight ends. The 305 right now, that range is Terrence Ferguson, Harold Vannon, Colm. I mean, I just got done saying that I think those tight ends might score like vaguely similarly. So again, that 305 is a very meaningful pick to get in a trade, right? So I think the trade is very nicely balanced.
And then when we move in, you mentioned at the start, you have a lot of leagues with other co-managers. You have some with Blair, some with Ben. Obviously, it'll be discussed on Stealing Bananas. But any interesting notes or tidbits from those that you want to bring up?
Well, when you're able to make a lot of trades, I think those are always fun. Blair and I had the 102, and anyone who's read the rookie guide knows that we're very high on McMillan. That's who we wanted to take. That's who we would have taken if we had stayed at the 102. You have this hope, if you're moving around in that range, that if you move down, the pick at 102 will be Hampton, which is a fine pick. And then maybe if you are able to swap like 102, 104, that the 103 might be Travis Hunter. It's a little bit trickier, I think, if you end up getting to 104 and McMillan goes 103, and then you're looking at Hunter. I mean, there's a very real chance that Hunter is the guy you want in this entire draft, that he ends up crushing Jeanty, right? I mean, that's one of the things we have to keep in mind, is that even though gee, he looks so good right now. I mean, you're talking about a running back, you're talking about the Raiders, and just the way all of this works. Even the extraordinary prospects, I mean, it's much more rare with them, but you can miss. But the other thing is we really like Travion Henderson. And if you move down, you could potentially take him. I think the gap between Hampton and Henderson is either overstated or just is wrong and should be flipped, right? So we move down a couple of picks. We move up from the 110 to the 109. Colm, I don't think it surprises anybody to hear that one of the things we're trying to do there is get in position to take Harvey. Every spot there matters. You don't know where he's going to go. We move up a little bit in the second round, which sort of sets the stage for a secondary jump every little bit. When you're then trying to move into that tier that we just talked about, that helps. And then we also swapped Cooper Kupp and Tucker Kraft. Colm, real quick here, do you have any thoughts on Kraft? Because he was... We made specifically the offer for him in this, really kind of wanting him to get to a fourth tight end, which then you're like really starting to lock down the position. We also got him kind of as a throw-in in a different trade in a different league, which I was surprised to get that. It was actually a trade to go and get Tyler Warren, where we got a bunch of pieces plus Kraft, who I expect to outscore Warren at least this season. Am I thinking about the Green Bay Packers starting tight end incorrectly?
I hope not. Last year, I do remember specifically having numerous conversations, Shawn, where I was still on the Musgrave side of the conversation. You came out the winner at the end of the season in that. He, across metrics for the tight end position, ranks really favorably in 2024 in the top 5 of some of those, but in the top 20 of pretty much them all. The downside was that he has a couple of huge breakout games and then kind of so for the rest of the season. The one thing I would say is we've talked a lot about the Packers offense and how Jordan Love was not at his best last season, whether that was through injury, whether it was through the offensive scheme or just himself. I think there's a step forward in the Packers offense, and I think there's going to be a change based on the golden pick that leads to it being a more pass-heavy offense, and that'll lead to more target share to be spread around. And I do think that we've talked quite a bit about both Reed and Golden not being the biggest to go out there and start run blocking, and I think they will run less, but you still have to kind of have the threat of the run to get some of the passing things going. I think that we'll see Kraft on the field pretty much all the time, and that opens up the door for more of those explosive games. And I think we're going to take another step forward in that development. Like I'm saying about the disappointment of part of his season, he did have a game in week 11 against the Bears where he had 0 points, but he averaged 9.7 points per game, which isn't huge, but I think there's enough growth there to get him into the mid-teens on the average points per game side. So what I'm trying to say is I think the Packers offense is going to be not the Josh Jacobs show, and it's going to be the Jordan Love show this year. And I think that kind of rising tide is going to lift all boats. But I think when we're looking at me talking about wide receivers and that dropping a lot of passes, Tucker Kraft was pretty reliable in that case as well. And I think that your trade here is going to be quite favorable.
So this is another little note about these rookie drafts that I do think is important, which is that you can move off of veterans who are still going to produce quite a bit in the future, but are probably at their peak, and or you can move off of players who represent short-term risk. One of the people that we moved off of a ton last year was George Pickens, who, interestingly enough, still actually had a fine year, but now you look at his ADP in seasonal formats and has dropped substantially. Some of that due to things that you wouldn't necessarily have been able to forecast, like the acquisition of DK Metcalf. But the flip side of that is that you can make selections, or as part of these trades, you can add young veterans who are on the cusp of breaking out, but still have prices attached to them that work to kind of grease the wheels or make prices match in trades. I'm excited that we were able to add Kraft in a couple of leagues. Then Colm, the second little move that we made, which I think much more controversial and one that did actually lead to another little flurry of offers for the rest of our receivers from other managers. We traded Garrett Wilson for the 108 and a future 2. Frequent listeners will know how much we like Garrett Wilson. At the same time, you have that sort of basket of risk that I just discussed with him. And I'm relatively optimistic about this fit with Justin Fields, but there probably even then is a ceiling to where if you lose, you probably don't lose in a massive way unless the pick that you move in for is a miss. And obviously the pick there that we moved in for was Harvey. And so definitely starting to stack a lot of risk in a single player, but that's how you also win big, like we did last year, for example, with Brock Bowers, like we did with Bucky Irving. Now, Irving is different because the risk of stockpiling someone as a third-round pick is different than stockpiling someone in that range where it costs you a Garrett Wilson. But the other part of this is that second-round pick, and I think that can look like not very much now, and it's possible that it won't be very much because I'm pretty skeptical about these picks after the 207 this year. I do think that there's a pretty good chance that pick will be early in round 2. And then Colm, we were able to move down from the 202 to the 203. So kind of in that range where we talked about it being flat, and move up from the 209 to the 206, getting that tier break jump. We also actually gave up this big move from like the 410 to the 702. So this is another one where if you're looking only at the picks, maybe like you guys just lost value on this straightforwardly. But again, it's the tier breaks there that make almost all of the difference. And then finally moved back from the 210, got the 304, the 305, and gave up the 310. Those are the picks that Blair and I are on the clock for right now. And one of the things that I would note again there, that once you get, and we talk about this tier break at 207, there are guys who could potentially go. You have a Jack Besh who could go in there. You have a Kyle Williams who could potentially go in there. Monty and I did actually just make a trade to get in for the 210 because Tootin was still there. So you want to be aware of the fact that not every draft goes exactly to form, but in my experience, most of these are going pretty tightly to form because it's such a big break. Once you get past that break, wherever it does occur in your specific draft, then I think you're then again in a tier that stretches to, the 401, the 402, the 403. So you move back. So Colm, that's how I would kind of like to move through drafts. You and I don't necessarily have enough picks in the one that we discussed, having Jeanty and then making this early second round pick. We'll see how the listener league plays out because we do have a lot of selections. Most of them are in at least moderately unfavorable areas to completely maximize. So we ended up getting some second round picks, getting some third round picks. The third round picks I'm very much looking forward to. I think a lot of these guys in round 3 are so much fun. The second round picks, you're going to be like, well, this is the same as what you're going to get from someone in early round 4.
So we're going to finish it up, Shawn, with the trade I made today that I'm still talking myself through. I was like 102, I'm on the clock. I'm trying to, move back. So I lock up the other managers. I send offers for like the 103, the 104, moving back that way. Some managers have like multiple first round picks, trying to see what I can do. So I'm working out a trade at that particular moment in time with the manager as the 107, 111. And I'm looking to make a package that I can kind of move back to that point, basically turn the 102 into the 2 first, and then turn multiple other picks with a pick swap into a late second, along with the picks that I would give to him. And I'm kind of working it through, and it seems like he's very tempted. It's pretty close. I'm like, what else can we do to make it work? But when I'm in the meantime, well, if this doesn't go through, I'm going to send out these other offers, send out a lot of offers. Then I'm like, which players would I give up the 102 for? So I'm looking down through rosters and, who may be available. I'm like, I don't think Brock Bowers will be available. I put in the offer then for Trey McBride. I think maybe the manager thinks he had a big season, doesn't like Kyler Murray, but like myself, and it might work out. So I put in the 102 for Trey McBride, Shawn. As I'm working on the other offer quite excitedly, and then, the inbox hits like, trade offer accepted. So the offer that went out was the 102 for Trey McBride. The offer that was accepted was that. You always wonder then, that was accepted. Usually there's a counter comes in, but I'm hoping it's the case that he was very excited to get the 102 and it was on the clock and blah, blah, blah. The 102, Shawn, this is non-tight end premium PPR Superflex 12 team. In need of tight end. But is that an overpay for our boy Trey McBride?
No. He's
the
111.
Don't worry about
startup value, Shawn. For me. Right. You can get the rankings tiered by position. You can get the draft grid that shows them all visually up on the site. I'm excited about McMillan, excited about Henderson, Hampton, excited about Travis Hunter, but there's still almost a full round of value there that we're talking about early in a startup, where every pick, as you drop from one to the next, and as you're maneuvering these startups, every pick valuable. Colm, I think you've really set yourself up nicely here. And again, I think this is something that's really good to think through when we're talking about rookie drafts. You don't necessarily know where the other manager is going to come at it from. Certainly just because I have McBride ranked higher doesn't mean that he'll be more valuable going forward. Man, these elite tight ends and the gap between Bowers and McBride, and then down to, well, I mean, the gap between Bowers and McBride is a meaningful little gap. But then when you're talking about Laporta as the number 3, there's a big gap there. I just talked about how I'm relatively skeptical of Loveland and Warren, but Loveland is actually the tight end 4 in the Dynasty rankings. So it gives you a sense of the massive, massive gulf between these very top guys and everyone else. If you can have a Brock Bowers, a Trey McBride on your roster, it completely changes everything.
So it gets the Shawn Siegele seal of approval. That's obviously good to get, but we'll see how it plays out over the course of the season. I was pretty excited to get it done. So let's see how it goes. We are going to come back, Shawn, kind of a listener mailbag episode later this week, talking through some of the rookies and your thoughts on those particular players maybe we haven't talked about as much over the course of the last week or two, and even before the NFL draft, people looking for some takeaways on them. So that will come out later this week. Make sure you are subscribed to the RotoViz Overtime podcast feed. You'll get all those episodes once they come out. I also recorded earlier this week with Kyle Dvorak. We talked through a lot of the wide receiver landscape, and there's a show coming out later this week with him as we dive into zero RB for 2025 post NFL draft. So lots of stuff there as well. You can check out all of Shawn's work up on rotoviz.com as well as in the RotoViz Rookie Guide. Until we are back, have a good one.